Welcome to The View from the Summit, conversations with the world's top trainers, handlers, and athletes in the equestrian and canine sports. Brought to you by Summit Animal Health. Hello, everyone. Welcome to View from the Summit. My name is Steve Searcy, and we have some very special guests for you. If you're a trail rider, pay attention because these guys are the ultimate. And before I do that, I want to introduce my co-host, Robin Benson. She is an equestrian from, well, I don't want to say way back because she's such a young lady, but for a long time now, from 3-day eventing to barrel racing to now she and her husband have a working ranch in northern Minnesota. Robin Benson, welcome, Robin.
Hey, Steve, thanks. It's great to be here.
Well,
this is super fun.
Good. It will be fun. So I get to introduce Heather and Jeremy, and these guys are the Heather and Jeremy Reynolds, Reynolds Racing. They are the kings and queen of the Tevis Cup. Now, if you don't know what that is, I'm gonna let them tell you a little bit, and if they're modest, I'm gonna interrupt and correct them because I think they do have a tendency to be a little modest. Hi guys, welcome to the show.
Hi.
Hey, thanks for having us.
So I don't know whether Jeremy, listen to that, Jeremy or Heather. I combine your names. That way you both answer this, Jeremy. Anyway,
we're efficient around here.
Yeah, I don't know who wants to tell us what the Tevis Cup is, but lay it on us.
Here, you could say it, Jeremy.
Okay. Yeah, the Tevis Cup is the ultimate trail ride from Lake Tahoe in Nevada, or kind of on the California side, all the way down to Auburn, California, which used to be California's capital. And it was actually started in the 50s, and it was a challenge from the gentleman from the West to challenge any horse to come of any breed to come and compete on 100 miles over the Sierras and to prove your horse's abilities and whatnot. And then it became what we now is the modern endurance, the sport of endurance. So it's a true test of horse and rider over very extreme terrain.
And the original ride is kind of interesting because they used to post stamp your letter you carried for the 100 miles at the beginning and at the end to say your start and finish time to see who the winner was, which is kind of neat.
Oh, that's really neat.
That's cool.
What's the time frame of this?
You have 24 hours to complete. Yeah.
So it's one horse, one rider, 24 hours, and a 100-mile trail.
And
Wow.
and some of the inclines, what are some of the terrain that you have to go over?
Well, overall, the cumulative, it has
Around 18 or 19,000.
Yeah, 18,000 gain, and I think between 20 and 22,000 descent. Or no.
I think that's correct.
Yeah, or is it 16?
It's roughly that.
Yeah, roughly. Yeah, something like that.
Large climbs, large descent.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go measure. I'm not going to go step it off. Okay, I'm not going to do that. That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
That really is. So, I mean, the first question that I know I have, and that probably our listeners have, I know that we have a lot of trail riding fans and listeners, but this is not your average trail ride. And so the first question would be, how do you even prepare for something like that? I mean, it's a long, steep, you've got altitude, you've got weather, you've got different terrain. I know it's a long process to prepare, but can you give us a few little highlights on some tried and true? Because you guys didn't just win it this year. You've won it, and you're really you're veterans of this type of competition.
Yeah, so we typically actually only ride our horses 3 days a week. So it's kind of like an every other day, like rest or stress and then rest, kind of our attitude about training. And then actually on the off days, our non-training days, we do walk our horses. So whether we use an exerciser or we walk on their back, and we just put a lot of miles, a lot of time. It changes throughout the year, and depending on the horse's abilities and mileage for competition, on how many miles we actually do and what kind of speed, that's all variable. But mainly is just getting out there and spending time with your horse and hours in the saddle. And that's what we just absolutely love to do. And that's what our training barn does, is primarily conditioning of endurance horses. And so, yeah, so there's a lot of, I mean, we truly believe in walking. So there's a lot of the fun, faster stuff, but there's a lot of walking, which can get monotonous. But for Heather and I, we just love spending time with our horses. So, or anyone's horses that send them to us. So it's about time on your feet, really.
But really, for our sport, the horse has to be at least 5 years old to begin the process of becoming an endurance horse. So for the Tevis Cup, since it's so hard, there's a rule the horse has to be a minimum age of 6. But in reality, 7 would be pretty young to take to that ride, because it's a pretty challenging ride. And it would take an endurance horse at least 3 years of trail riding to even expect to ask them to do something like that.
That's really, really interesting, because a lot of people we talk to on this podcast and a lot of top competitors with horses are riding on the other end, right? They're futurity trainers and they're working with the really young horses, and it's a race against time to get the money. I mean, obviously they're doing it with the best interest of the horse in mind, but really pushing, like the 2-year-olds and the 3-year-olds to get ready for a performance year at 3 or 4 or maybe 5 years old. Coming from my background of 3-day eventing, I totally hear what you're saying, because the maturity level of a horse's body takes time, right? And to build that endurance. So you mentioned walking, and I love that, because so many times people get on their horse and feel like they're not doing anything when they're walking, but there's a lot of people who love to just enjoy the scenery and walk. And, so let's talk about walking for a minute. I mean, do you measure the stride? Do you go for a certain amount of time? Do you travel to change altitudes to adjust your horses, or do you live in a place with adjustable altitude? I mean, if a person and do you compete in other distance endurance races besides the Tevis Cup?
Yeah, we do almost, I would say, I think we're in the mid-teens of events for the year. So every 2-3 weeks we do an event. And then
it's pretty common for each of us to compete between 600 and 1,000 miles a year.
Wow.
Of competition miles.
Yeah. Not on each horse, but
just as a rider.
Yeah. We actually tend to do a little bit, well, obviously slower miles as they're younger, but our top 100-mile horses usually will only do like three or 4 events spread out through the entire year, because they're usually doing hundreds. And we give our horses a lot of most of their time off is after the race, so they get big breaks after races. So yeah, so there's just so many variables to do with that. But
going back to walking, when we're walking, we try to encourage an active walk rather than a lackadaisical see the flowers walk. So we want them to be marching at the walk and really using themselves at the walk.
Yeah, and that's like a 4 to 4.5 mile an hour walk if you had a GPS.
Which, that's the goal.
Yeah.
It's hard to get them to reach that number, but the goal pace would be that.
Yeah.
Sure.
It's funny.
So,
Go
ahead, Jeremy.
I was gonna say, well, yeah, we use a walker in Florida, because we split our time. We're half the year in Florida and then half the year in California. We don't actually do specific for altitude training. So, but I mean, that's one of the prettiest places to do walking is up in the mountains, I believe. But yeah, so in Florida, we use an exerciser, because we train a lot of numbers in Florida. So that's the best way we can do it. And we kind of try to hit like around 12 miles of walking on walking days. And we just kind of came up with that number by an hour time. And then also try to mimic kind of like the Mustang or the wild horse. to hit that average, they kind of hit around a 12 mile an hour, 12 miles per day. And we feel that that's kind of a healthy number for horses, just to keep like a baseline of health and minimum exercise level. So that's what we're trying to goal.
And then endurance horses, it's very common for endurance horses to be kept out. It's very uncommon for them to be in a stall or a paddock situation. So pasture turnout is also in their favor.
Yeah.
That's a really good point for sure. And then you mentioned that originally the Tevis Cup was all breeds welcome, come test out the endurance. But what do you see on average as the best breed that you find for this sport? I mean, all sports have, different breeds that are sort of dominant. And so what do you find is the breed that trains more easily and performs more easily for this type of challenge?
For sure, Arabians. Yeah.
Yeah, you get all types of Arabians, all body types of Arabians, and then Arabian crosses. But there's like you were saying, any breed. There were some mules out there. There's Appaloosas, quarter horses, gaited horses, Mustangs, all sorts of things.
Yeah, Mustangs tend to really hold up well for endurance as well. I feel like and there's some fast ones out there, but all in all, they're just gritty. They can really do the miles in tough terrain. So you see a decent amount of Mustangs, and a handful of mules here and there. Mules are really great too for the sport. Not real fast, but they're hardy as well. And there are
real consistent.
Yeah. And there are quite a few different gaited breeds that do quite well in the sport.
And actually, the record horse for holding the record amounts of completions at the Tevis was a foundation quarter horse.
Wow.
A big, giant 1,200-pound mare that has 13 completions.
Wow. That's cool.
Tell us a little bit about in a previous conversation, Jeremy and I talked a little bit. Tell us about the extreme of the trail itself.
Yeah, so we there's 3 main canyons, and we hit that in the middle of the race, and then so we kind of Heather and I break the race into like 3 parts. So the first part is the most treacherous mountain, a lot of rock with some bogs and
kind of scrambling over stuff.
Yeah, scrambling over boulders and pretty good rock. And then the second section that we kind of consider the race in the middle is these deep canyons that get extremely hot, and they're really steep down and up. And then the last section, the last third, is a little bit more on the line of like longer gradual descents, and it still has a decent amount of climbing, but not a crazy amount compared to the first 2 sections. And you're talking about we're 3 and 4 mile descents and climbs at times, and down to the bottom of the canyons, because
the Auburn area gets into the hundreds easily that time of year. But when you're in the bottom of the canyon, you're kind of in this little pit with no air movement at times.
Yeah, and a little bit of humidity because the river's down at the bottom, and we're easily getting into the low hundreds at that point.
Wow.
And you mentioned to me that at some places the width of the trail is 18 inches and there's brush on either side and it's trying to knock you off. And
and this year was exceptional because there was a huge fire that happened last year, and where 17 miles had been kind of destroyed. But and the trail has been, they do trail work every year, but this year they really attacked the trail and did some serious trail widening and clearing some treacherous stuff. And it's
a narrow trail, but it's not an impossible trail by any means.
Yeah, and now there's the sport of ultra running was also started on the course, and so we share the course with the runners, not on the day of the race, but the workload. It used to be they competed together for quite a while, but now there's just too many runners and riders together. But the running group, Western States, they do a tremendous amount of trail clearing, so it's a really group effort. And then we have the full support of the Auburn, the town of Auburn, and there's people that don't even compete, and they're just out there
The mayor of
helping.
Auburn was out there helping.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
And
awesome.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
just a sense of community in the area for endurance sports in general. And but it's a lot because that trail used to be a mining trail. Before that was kind of an well, I mean, I guess parts of it were from like the Indian traveling through the Sierras, the Indians as well, or Native Americans. And so there's a long history of the trail being there a long time. And yeah, so you do a lot of keeping that trail existent because the Sierras are between the winters, the rain in the foothills, and then the high snowpack in the Sierras. It gets pretty trashed, and so yeah, there's a lot
Do
of
you
work
have
to the
like
trail.
rock slides or any of that? If it's raining, mudslides, I
All
know
of
rain
that.
may be, but do you face
Yeah,
that while
yeah,
you're
but
on
not
it?
during the event, obviously. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And just so that people are not overly concerned, talk to us about hydration of the horse and the monitoring of the horse's health as the race progresses.
Yeah, so we have mandatory holds. We have 2 1-hour holds, and then we have an additional. Heather's counting it right now. I think there's 6 or 8 additional vet checks.
8.
Oh, 8.
So there's 8 checkpoints where the veterinarian will check every aspect of your horse and deem whether it's fit to continue. So it can't be limping, it can't be dehydrated, it can't have big surface factor cuts that are questionably uncomfortable for the horse. I mean, a little nick, okay, something acceptable. And if the horse is not deemed fit to continue, then you're done for the day, and you're simply just out of the event at that point.
Yeah, and they go over about 10 different metabolic parameters. So it's not just fitness of or soundness. It's also a metabolic check. So they're checking heart rate and
the gut sounds. They're listening to their guts. And the other neat thing about endurance is part of the strategy and pacing is at some of these checkpoints where you have a mandatory stop, your stop time does not begin until your horse's heart rate recovers down to the prescribed number. And so if you're riding too fast and that heart rate is not recovering, if it takes too long, you'll be eliminated because you have a time limit on how long you're allowed to have it recover. But let's say Jeremy comes into the checkpoint 5 minutes ahead of me, but his horse's heart rate does not recover, and I simply come in and mine's recovered. I've just made it 5 minutes without doing anything. So that's kind of a fun part of the strategy of training and pacing your horse correctly as well.
And on some races, like 5 minutes, oh, that doesn't sound like a lot, but on some races or some sections of trail, even at the Tevis, 5 minutes is a full mile, can be a full mile or even a mile and a half. So it's a big distance you could be covering just by efficiency or strategy.
And
Wow.
since it is a race and you're out there in it, how do you know where you are, whether you're first or 10th or 12th? How do you know that?
Well, at all those checkpoints, they're recording everything by times and everything, so you can get splits easily that way.
But it's a mass start, so you kind of know when you start. Okay, I started roughly in the middle, or I started roughly in the front. You know, and if you're really there to compete, you'll start counting and keeping track of who's around you and how many are there.
And these are competitors that we see, over the year, so we know you know who you're competing against, what horses you need to be kind of more worried about and pacing with and whatnot, and knowing strengths. There's a lot of strategy, but that's part of the fun of it.
But at each of these checkpoints, there's ham radio operators as well as the in timer / out timer. So the in timer will record everyone who arrived into the check. The out timer records everyone who's left the check. So if anyone gets lost, you could find a number 110 left check at X time. Yeah. And when you're leaving or entering one of these points, you could say how many have arrived ahead of me. If you're 90th, they're not going to count 90 people. But if you're in the top 10, they could tell you, there's 6 ahead of you or whatever. So you can kind of get a rough idea of where you're running.
Yeah, and this year even they made it mandatory to carry GPS, so everyone was carrying GPS, and it was online. And when you got service, your crews could know where you are and kind of keep up with the course in the race as we were going, so in live time. So that was really neat too.
So before this, 2 or 3 racers would be lost every year, and they're still wandering the mountains, right? They don't know where they are.
Yeah,
we still have never seen them.
Yeah.
Well,
it'd be honestly pretty difficult to get lost because the trail is a one-way trail and there's not a lot of offshots of trails. I mean, in major areas that we cross through, but when you're in the high country and whatnot, there's only one way to really go.
Yeah, I bet I could get lost. I'm pretty good at it. So tell me, what do you do? You told us about exercise and stuff. What do you do food-wise, supplement-wise to make sure that your horse can endure 100 miles, 24 hours, and all that vertical and descending? And
yeah, so Tevis has been sponsored by.
You froze, Jeremy. So wait a minute, they went away.
Oh.
They'll come back.
We're back. Okay.
All right.
Yeah. So Tevis has been sponsored by a local feed store, Echo Valley Ranch, and Tammy and Greg Kimler, and they sponsor feed, grain, hay, water troughs, and so normal endurance rides you have it's easier access for crews and whatnot and you'd have your normal feeds, grains and hays from home. Yeah. But at Tevis, it's a little different. So they send in stuff and about it's, between I would say average about every 6 miles. There's one of those mandatory vet checks, so to speak. And they have a full gamut of grains and hays, and you're feeding your horse and giving them a break.
Mm-hmm.
So I know feeding is a big deal, and the horse's system, you don't want to change completely what you normally feed them. Do they offer a variety of commonly fed food, or does anyone have, do you run into trouble? I know it's hard to carry your food, so that's a great.
Yeah, I know there's in the industry there's a lot of that about switching hays and whatnot, but endurance in general, a lot of the time we kind of go like as long as they're not overeating, we let them eat whatever they want during the race, and kind of the horses just pick and choose what they want. So we don't really have those concerns. The only time like Heather and I have concerns if we let them to eat too much grain. So we limit them about 3 or 4 pounds per every checkpoint. So that's every couple hours in between checkpoints. So we don't really worry about that so much, but other than just overeating a grain.
Mainly because they just get gassy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
No belly aches on the trail.
Endurance horses in general, a lot of time they'll eat grain early and then they kind of switch to more roughage and hay, and they can't really go too overboard. The only other, I would say, caveat that to keep out a look for is after you're going for, I don't know, about 5 to 6 hours and mileage, you're getting into the halfway or 40 to 50 mile range. When you get horses that get really hungry, make sure they drink first. And if you're giving like alfalfa, it's a good idea to start wetting it down. Because they're out there for long sections and their throat gets pretty dry, and then they'll be starving and they'll come to grab hay and they'll start choking. Yeah, they do get a little ravenous. So that's the only thing that I would say when they're really ravenous to eat is make sure they drink before and start getting it.
Grab the hay, just dunk it in the trough and give it to them.
You don't have to fully soak it, but just get it a little damp. It seems to make a big just a big safety factor, but a lot of help for that. Yeah.
That's a great point. So for trail riders in general, some days are long, and I know even on the ranch, our horses will go a long time, hours, probably longer than your horses without eating.
Yeah.
And a lot of them don't. No, go ahead. A lot of them don't want to drink first. They want to eat because they're hungry.
Yeah.
And if you don't have fresh grass to eat, if it's dry hay, that's a really good tip to soak it, at least dunk it and get some moisture.
Yeah. And just a little bit of moisture. Yeah. And then the other thing is we're big proponents of electrolyting. We preload, so we have kind of a system. And then we kind of formulate our own electrolytes, and then we carry it on our saddle, and then we give it to them in regular intervals. to keep their to help them stay thirsty and to help them hold on to a lot of the extra that fluid. So
That's terrific. So tell me, I understand you use Summit, and tell us about your experience with Summit, before and after, and what you noticed. And
so we've been using Summit. I believe we're a little bit over a year now, and so I mean, I just believe that
Well,
it's
tell
been,
them about how it helps you first.
yeah.
Of all.
First, I wanted to. I mean, I'll give my horses stuff, but sometimes it's kind of a placebo effect because I can't tell you if it's helping or not. Especially if you have you're a horse that doesn't have any pre-existing issues. And
on a side note, Jeremy does ultra running and is a farrier, so he beats his body up. So
Wow.
yeah, so yeah. So I started taking Summit, and I used to on a big day of shoeing where I knew I had like 3 or 4 horses, I used to just kind of preemptively take some anti-inflammatories. And so I saw a friend ran a post saying she trims her horses, and she can't trim without using it. I was like, yeah, maybe I'll try
Summit.
Yeah, without using Summit. Sorry, and kind of jumping tracks there. Yeah. So and so I gave it a try, and lo and behold, I don't have to use NSAIDs at all anymore. I just take my Summit in the morning, and my back stays really loose and doesn't start aching when I get to that 3rd, 4th horse for the day. So then and at the same time I was giving it to my horses, but what I noticed is some of them that might have a little bit more wind puffs than others, or just tend to get stiff after hard workouts, they were not doing that. So and legs are staying a little tighter, and then they're bouncing back after races or after hard works much faster than normal. So I mean, it just helps on that recovery aspect.
And our top 100 mile horses are getting Summit every Tuesday.
Yeah.
So Tuesday's their good day.
Yeah, that's their day.
Yeah, they're feeling awesome. So it's really great to hear, because a lot of times we hear people use Summit, like if there's an injury, or if there's an older horse with stiff joints, which, if you're an older person with stiff joints, we can understand. But from a preventative and recovery standpoint, what you're saying, and you guys from a recovery standpoint would be deemed experts, in my opinion, for recovery, because it's all about recovery, right? So that's really neat to hear that it's helpful without an injury, but just, for recovery also.
Yeah, and it's normal to have horses that have high mileage or maybe some conformation flaws to have joint effusion or wind puffs, if you will, and just to notice like a 15-20% reduction in that overall filling is really, I think, huge. I mean, in any sport, if you got a 4 or 5% increase in performance, that's just like mind-blowing. But when you're seeing like noticeably difference in tightness in legs and stuff like that, or just a little bit turnaround on recoveries, that's huge. And I mean, honestly, when you could see it if you could see it by your eye, you're seeing 15-20% difference. So minimum, yeah. So that, and then we're even starting that on younger horses now that we have the ability to, when they're starting to bump up their mileage and stuff like that, just for preventative for long term, and we're seeing big benefits of that.
That's amazing. So Heather, you mentioned Jeremy does 100-milers. He does the big races too, and I know Steve and I were talking earlier. There's something you do a little bit differently in the long 100-mile equine races, right? As a strategy that kind of helps helps your horses compete. And do you want to share a little bit about that? I just think it's incredible as far as you running.
Yeah, so I only really do that at Tevis, mainly because the terrain is so extreme, and I'm not a big guy, but I'm competing against women that I'm usually giving up 30-40 pounds to. So I have to try to bridge that gap, that performance benefit from the weight. I end up running a lot of big downhills, and I hike a little bit of some of the bigger climbs. So, and that is definitely an advantage, but I'm trying to bridge a gap of physics. My horse is carrying a lot more weight than the people I'm competing against.
Well, but that's incredible. You get off your horse, you lead the horse, and the horse runs with you, right? So you're giving their back a rest
Yeah.
for the whole descent that you're running or, climbing up. And that's just an amazing strategy and requires you to train. Obviously you're doing the 100-mile runs, but you're training with your horses basically.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think they bond with you even more if you get off on extreme downhills or any extreme terrain and you get off with them, they start looking for you and with their eye, and they really appreciate it. And that bond, because they know what it's taking on the toll on their body. So they really appreciate it. And that bond gets a little bit stronger, I believe, when you spend a little bit of time. And it could be whatever your fitness level, or it doesn't matter. Just spending a quarter mile on the ground through a treacherous spot, the horses really appreciate it. And I think that's what I mean. I love that partnership we have with our animals, and I'm fortunate that I can run even more than just a little bit at a time, especially on the Tevis. So I feel like I get that stronger bond just because they really appreciate it.
Well, there's a very funny picture online, and I wish I could tell you where it was, but there's a couple of people riding by, and you're running with your horse, and the spectators are like looking like, what? The guys in the what? They can't quite put it together because they don't know the strategy, but it's pretty funny, the look on their faces. So, and I do want to clarify one thing. You're not taking Summit Max for your personal use. You're taking the pure C4S, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yes. He's not injecting himself with Summit.
Yeah.
It's the same stuff though, so we're grouping it all, but it's the oral version, right? So you're actually swallowing.
Yes, the oral version. Yeah.
Right.
Well,
yeah.
So really quick, because we got to wrap this up. What's next? What's your next big race? Where are you going?
We're gonna do actually next weekend. Well, next weekend we're gonna go do a clinic in Columbia and do a 65-mile race. So that's gonna be a blast.
Yeah.
And then a few weeks after that, we're gonna do a big 100 that is
historical 100.
a very historic 100 through Virginia City
in Nevada. It's a silver mining city. It's got a lot of history. It's really neat. And there's wild Mustangs that run through. It's going to be really fun.
It's like it's stuck in a time capsule visiting Virginia City. So if you want to go to an old Western town and it looks the way it did, 100 years ago.
The wooden sidewalks and place to tie your horse in front of the stores. And it's pretty cool.
That's cool.
It sounds like a blast. Well, if anybody is in the area, go to the race and root for these guys and have some fun. I want to thank you guys for being with us. I know you have a previous engagement you've got to get to, so thanks for carving out time. Robin, any parting words?
Yes, just thank you. It's been wonderful. You guys have not only shared some glimmers of these extreme races, but some fabulous tips. If you're listening today, whether you are a trail rider, a recreational rider, or any kind of performance rider, incorporating some of these tips into your program is surely beneficial. And also, Jeremy and Heather will stick it in the show notes, but where can people find you on social or online? If they want to follow your progress, follow your races, tell us where we can find you.
Well, we have a website at reynoldsracing.us. And then it's just my Facebook page, Heather Reynolds. We don't have a Reynolds Racing page on Facebook. That's about it. We're not on a bunch of other platforms.
Okay, awesome.
Perfect.
If you're listening today, thank you so much. Make sure to subscribe so you catch the new episode that drops every Wednesday. And we just appreciate you, Jeremy and Heather, so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
That's great. That's it from the View from the Summit. See you next week. Thank you. Thanks for joining us for A View from the Summit. This program is made possible by Summit Animal Health. Check them out online at summitanimals.com. Thanks for joining us again, and we'll see you next week for another View from the Summit.